Who are you inviting to church this weekend? So the other day, my mentor was sharing with us about the barriers that come up when it comes to inviting people to church and how people feel welcome. So first tonight, I'm going to talk about those barriers. Then I'm going to talk about maybe the don'ts, the things not to do in the inviting, and then maybe the do's. All right, so let's start off with those barriers. And again, everything that I'm saying to you, if the Holy Spirit overrides me, please listen to the Spirit, because this is just anecdotal information and things that I've been able to perceive over the past 20 to 25 years in discipleship, helping people come to know the Lord, and then that sanctification process and everything in between. All right, so those barriers. So the first thing that he shared was the idea that there is similarities that most people have in life. You have the similarities of the stresses and the noises that are going on. You have time barriers. You have then cultural barriers. There's food barriers. There's work and time space barriers. There's a lot of also nervousness about what is being put out there in the world with fear. There's just a lot of things that are the same in a lot of people, but also push people away. So what's the best way to kind of break down those barriers? Well, if a person is going to want to come to church, they're probably going to have to reschedule their time or maybe do something that they wouldn't normally do during that time. So how do they overcome that? That's a big one, I think, for most people. I think there's just the fear of the socioeconomics. Like, is your church too rich for them, too poor for them? What's the messaging at your church? And just at the end of the day, there's just the nuances of how people are already pre-programmed due to sin on cultures and food and timing and all of the fears that have already been put into their minds, probably from a young age. So I think when we want to share God's love with people and we want to share maybe an experience of taking them to church or a young adults event or youth group or whatever it might be, there's a lot of trepidation there because there's just so much information floating out in the world about a particular race or culture or people group or religion. So those barriers were something that need to be and have been addressed in my life, and so I just kind of wanted to share then with those barriers in mind the things not to do, and then inevitably how to, I think, get over those barriers. So one of the things I would suggest not doing is kind of just meeting people on the street and just trying to lure them into church. I think you want to try to, if you are going to do evangelism, I would really say try to really create a relationship with them. Be in their neighborhood, know the community. But if you do feel the Spirit, tugging on your heart to go somewhere or do something, I'm not going to, say anything against that. I do understand there are people out there who have that gift, and praise God, keep at it. However, I would say that if you do that, you should probably be in that area for some time, like the apostles were. Paul was, and we don't know the times and dates and the lengths, but a lot of times as a tent maker, he'd be in the marketplace. He would be connecting with people over a long period of time. It wouldn't just be, hey, I'm just going to show up, talk about God a bunch, maybe have fights with you, pass the quote-unquote microphone over, argue with them, maybe preach brimstone and fire, and then leave. I'm sure there was times maybe it felt like that, or people didn't know Paul in maybe the town squares or the synagogues, and they thought maybe he was doing that. But for the most part, Paul was well known by people and the other disciples as they would travel from place to place, as a lot of them had to be tent makers. They weren't a lot of paid pastors because there was a lot of persecution. There wasn't a lot of home bases and places like that. I think that my daughter has stepped into the frame. 1 second here. Do you need something, little lady? Okay, all right, off to TV time? Okay, see you soon. So, as I was saying, the main crux of the matter is that when you have that day-to-day presence in the community, I think you can go into that community and do that type of evangelism if you're called. But I think a lot of the times, most people, our calling is to do that type of evangelism or that type of discipleship, beginning steps of discipleship or sharing the gospel in a, person-to-person setting. and in a friendship setting, in a neighborly setting, a coworker setting. But I'll get to that in a moment. So I really wouldn't suggest just going off and just sharing stuff. There was actually another situation the other day where someone said, "Oh, I'm going to take a bunch of flyers and I'm just going to put them on people's cars." I really would suggest not doing that. One of the reasons is because there's a lot of psychics and a lot of other people who are doing that for advertising, and most of the time people just take it and throw it on the ground, and then all of a sudden you have a mole that's really angry with you at your church because there's maybe hundreds of pamphlets on the floor. People got to clean it up. It's just not very kind, and it's a bit intrusive to just touch people's property and just start promoting that way. I would say a better way maybe is to try to talk to people individually, even just for a moment. Say hello, get to know them a little bit, and if you want to invite them instead of maybe having a deep conversation with them, then yeah, sure, invite them, just try your best to talk to them a little bit, get to know them. I would also suggest, not just doing it right off the bat when you meet somebody. If someone's in a dire situation, sure, maybe, or if there's a question that needs to be answered, hey, take them to the church. Maybe there's a pastor or there's an elder or person that you really trust that can maybe help that person. That's a great idea. But just off the cuff, you meet someone somewhere and you just have that gusto to invite them to church, may not be the best way to go about it. And again, I'm not saying that I've got it right. I'm just saying from all the years and all the situations that I've seen in my lifetime and from what I've heard from other people and even some of the literature I've read, you're going to only get a certain amount of time usually out of that person, whether they dismiss you right away or they come to church for a little bit and then they kind of feel out of place. Now, again, there are some situations where people have been totally blessed and loved. So if the Spirit leads you in that way, you do it. But it's not something that if you feel like this, like impulsion to do, or you feel like you have to do it in a certain way, or you're being pushed by people in your church to do, I really would suggest that you don't do it that way, because it just is, it's not relational. I don't think a lot of people come to know Christ because of, I don't think a lot of people stay Christians because of their fear of hell or because of their, just purely their curiosity. They're looking for a relationship, which gateways into, I think, the things that we should do when inviting people to church, or having those people who are already maybe ready to go in mind. I think it's about building those relationships. So if you are that person who's on the streets, like we talked about, like a Paul or a Peter or the different apostles that we see in the Bible, I think they moved into a neighborhood. They were there for some time. If there was someone needy, they weren't ripping out pages of the Bible to feed people. They were out there feeding them. They were giving them bottles of water. They were connecting with them. Of course, if you're within your own church, it's a different type of feeding and you're taking care of your own. But this is like getting out there, getting the gospel out there. It's going to be a little bit of a different dynamic. And for the most part, you help by helping the community in the hopes that you want them to come to know the Lord. But it needs to be authentic. If you're only doing it to get numbers and seats filled in your pulpit, I would say that that's not the best way to go about it. I think it has to be genuine relationship, because people feel that. People can't describe love for a reason, because it's a deep-seated feeling of acceptance, of belonging, of allowing yourself to be open and having that person to share alongside with you in that, time or wondrous moment. So I would say that the people you may want to look to would be people either within the community that you kind of know, if you're already starting to build that rapport, or the people who are, really well known in your life. So your neighbors, your coworkers, your friends, your family members, people who know you, who have seen you for some time and are most likely aching for an invite, not maybe to come to know Christ, but just to see why you're different. Because I promise you, if you're different and they've known you long enough and you're dealing with hardships and trials and tribulations and issues in your life, they're going to want to know why. They're going to want to understand this thought process. And it might sound even cult-like to them, because a lot of people don't deal with things very well in life. They usually go to social media or a lot of media outlets or other toxic type people in their lives, and they get the same answers. And when they find someone peaceful, they're thrown off by that. So I would encourage you to first start looking in the people that you know. And if you want to invite them and you feel led and called, start praying for them even before you invite. I wouldn't say just pick up the phone right now. Maybe you've watched the video and say, hey, come to church. And again, if the Spirit's leading, cool. But I would really suggest you start really praying for that person, maybe investing in that relationship a little bit deeper, and maybe seeing where God allows for a gateway of conversation to invite that person to church. There was some ridiculous statistic, I can't remember the exact numbers, but I'm pretty sure it was like 40 to 60%, that when they polled these people across, I think, North America, maybe in some more of the Western countries, that between the ages of, I think, the ages of 15 and 45, that around 40 to 60% people would actually enjoy or would like to try going to church, but people aren't inviting them. And I think that's a beautiful representation of, if we're doing the right thing in our world and people see the difference in Christianity compared to the rest of the world as things get more and more hairy every day, that we have this difference, and that this difference is causing them who are searching to actually, look around and say, hey, there's something different about these people. And that gives us this wonderful opportunity to point them to Christ. But I do believe it needs to be an authentic relationship. If you're just doing it for doing its sake, I don't think it's going to work as well as it could. God can still work in spite of it, just like the Jonah situation when he didn't want to go to Nineveh. But I think in most cases in this discipleship realm, you see the apostles, you see the early church, there was a deep love for anyone and everybody. There wasn't a class system. It was everyone sitting together with everyone. In fact, Paul writes about disengaging the class system, disengaging the cultural differences, disengaging your race differences, and being able to meet together at the table. So I hope this encourages you to look at the people that you know already and to build authentic relationships, and inevitably, help them to come to church. But more importantly, I hope this allows you to think about the way you're interacting with other people right now, and helps you to see if you're actually sharing with them that Christ-like disposition that we should have, that would even make them want to come to church. Again, I'm not saying that you shouldn't invite random people. I'm not saying that you shouldn't, be going out there into the highways and the byways and sharing God's love. But I do think if we want to point people to Christ in a relationship and discipleship way, the best way to do it is in our day-to-day, because I guarantee you there's dozens and dozens of people who would want to know who Christ is. So as I land the plane here, one of the strategies I would say is just, hey, in your neighborhood, find a gluten-free, wheat-free, dairy-free, blah, 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 free, I don't know, type treat or something, chocolate or something simple. Put your phone number on it if you feel comfortable. And of course, you need to keep boundaries and keep safe. We need to be cunning as serpents and gentle as doves in a world filled with wolves and packs of them. So I think we do need to keep up our boundaries and keep safe. But I think we do also need to stretch ourselves. And, if you feel comfortable, a number or email or something like that, and just get to know your neighbors, get to know your coworkers, get to know the people around you. And I promise you, as you do that and you're prayerful and you're intentional, God will bring in his harvest, and he will love and use you he will love through you and use you to expand his kingdom, and hey, for you to get the best out of this life and the next. If you'd like to watch any other dads doing dishes, take a look at the video right here in the playlist. Please subscribe if you can, it really helps. I just want to say thank you so much for watching. Have yourself a wonderful day, evening, morning, or night. God bless.